Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for everyone who has joined us this afternoon. It's truly a pleasure. We look forward to the opportunity to providing you with some educational information in regards to IAQ and the technologies that lie ahead. I want to start first without going death by PowerPoint and really make an introduction to myself. My name is Jesse Coiro. I'm the general manager here at Lab. I've been with Lab for almost 12 years now. As you see behind me, we are a company that focuses on filtration solutions for the protection mainly of laboratory personnel, protecting their breathing zones from chemical hazards as well as bioaerosol emissions. Everything you see behind me are functioning products, all with carbon and or HEPA filtration. And we have halos, which are above me, which protect the ambient atmosphere and the ambient air we breathe from any generalized pollutants, whether it be at the chemical side, molecular level, or the bioaerosol side, as well as generalized PM 2.5. We've been providing filtered solutions for over 50 years. It's all we focus on. So again, everything we make is to protect, but this isn't about a commercial. It's really about providing, again, that educational piece that everybody's lacking regarding how do we properly mitigate the risk of not just aerosolized viruses and aerosolized transmission, but just generalized pollution, as we're all very in tune with indoor air quality. And as you can see, I have a lot of water in front of me here, and it's not because we are sponsors of Poland Springs. This has significance, and it represents the amount of air we breathe every minute. We breathe about 8 to 10 liters of air every minute. Here we have 10 liters of water. Not many people can put into perspective the amount of air that we breathe and we consume and the risk factor it has on our overall health. And as you can imagine, we drink bottled water or purified water every day. Nobody really wants to drink from a tap. Nobody's going to go into a river, or if these waters were visually dirty, you would not want to drink them. Why? Because you care about your body, you care about your health, and you know if you consume something that visually looks dirty or has an odor to it, you're not going to consume it. With the air you breathe, unfortunately, we can't see the dangers mostly, especially when we talk about indoor air quality and specifically PM 2.5. So those are all types of particles, whether they be viral or viable, non-viable particles that are floating around us every single day. And again, we want to talk about how do we protect the very air you breathe. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start with the presentation. Please, at any time, if anybody has a question, raise your hand on the panel. I will see it and I will answer it. We can make this as interactive as you would like. So just give me one moment here. My presentation. Okay. All right. Tim, you're good? You can see that? All right, excellent. All right, so I talked to you a little bit about Lab, who we are, so I don't have to go through this slide here. But a couple of did you know facts that I always like to start with. Again, we discussed the very air we breathe, 8 to 10 liters of air per minute. But another fact that not many people realize is for every breath we take in a communal setting, we breathe 3% of someone else's air, which again, why we are seeing high spikes in just respiratory illnesses, because we shed a tremendous amount of viruses, whether we're showing symptoms or we're asymptomatic or not. So again, we have to address what is floating in the ambient air. 90% of our time is spent indoors. And we focus on the air quality outside, which we should, but we always forget about that critical component where we live most of our lives, and that's in indoor spaces. Poor air quality contributes to over 6 million premature deaths per year. Now that's, in America, there's about 300 to 500,000 annually that people die just because of the air they breathe. That's a very high number and a pandemic in and of itself. Indoor air is about 2 to 5 times, sometimes 100 times more polluted than the very outside air we breathe. And the EPA ranks IAQ, or indoor air quality, among one of the top 5 environmental dangers. Now, one of the things that we've learned since COVID is that the greater the particle load that's present in a room or a facility, it actually increases the risk of infection of airborne bioaerosols. It's because the more pollution, the more particles that are floating around in the atmosphere, the more transporters that are there for viruses to latch onto and float around. And every breath we take, again, 8 to 10 liters per minute, we're breathing those particles, again, whether they're viral, non-viral, deep into our lungs. And we'll talk about that. But let's first understand, sorry about that, skip the slide. The size of particles, right? Because a lot of people understand PM 2.5, but it doesn't stop there. If we kind of compare particle size, you look at human hair, which is 50 to 180 micron in size, all the way down to beach sand, 90 micron in size. White blood cells and red blood cells are about 15 micron in size. And then dust particles that you can see floating in the air are about 10 micron in size. Then you get into respiratory droplets, and that's where it becomes extremely critical. Those are between 5 and 10 micron in size. Then we go to 2.5, and those are dust particles. And when you get below 5 micron in size, these particles like to remain suspended in the air for a very long period of time. And again, every breath you take, they're going into our lungs, which means they go into our lung sacs, into our bloodstream. You look at bacteria, it's 1 to 3 micron in size. Wildfire smoke, which is hugely impactful on the West Coast. And of course, viruses like the coronavirus, like RSV, like pneumonia, all this is about 0.1 to 0.5 micron in size. So when we say PM 2.5, we cannot stop there. We have to look at the risk factors of everything below those micron size. And I'm going to talk to you about how we do that. Take a step back and go into, okay, PM 2.5, risk factors, COVID, aerosolized transmission. What do I do? Well, first and foremost, we need to mitigate the risk. We need to take the viruses away from breathing zones or any type of pollution up and away from the breathing zone. But again, we also have to be very cognizant of what indoor air quality does and what it contributes to our overall health. And as you can see from the infographic there, anywhere from short-term effects to long-term effects, from headaches to respiratory issues like chronic asthma, and then you go into liver disease, cardiovascular disease, prenatal deaths. It has a huge impact on the overall health. And again, as I mentioned in a couple slides previous to this, exposure to PM 2.5 is actually linked to higher, not just COVID-19 infections, but overall respiratory infections and mortality rates. And I have a citation from the NIH, which explains that in a little bit more detail. But again, as we talk about breathing in those pollutions, when you look at the lung and how it's developed, you have the alveoli, which are these little pockets deep into the lung sac. And this is where those smaller particles, again, whether it be a bacteria, whether it be a virus, whether it just be generalized pollution, they go deep into the lung sacs. The more we compromise that goes right into our bloodstream and into our oxygen, the greater the risk of just generalized disease, whether it's short-term or long-term effects, and infection itself. So again, it's very risky. I know we tend to forget, again, we don't see it like we see the water, right? See the water we drink, we don't see that the air is polluted. Sometimes, most times, you don't even smell it. So how do you know? Well, we don't. So we have to find ways to actually monitor, but also have permanent solutions to know that we're cleaning that air. Talk about how viruses are spread. Again, this isn't just COVID-19. We're not past that. That's going to be part of our lives, unfortunately, forever. But we look at the spikes in RSV, the spikes in hospitalizations for children with pneumonia due to RSV, the norovirus. Like the list goes on and on. This has been a very tough fall and winter for respiratory illnesses. And it's because couple reasons. We weren't exposed for a few years because we were all covered, we weren't protected, and now we're hit with these viruses and our bodies don't really know how to react. But also, we haven't really addressed the true problem. We've done some things because we've done what the CDC has told us to do, we've done what NIH has told us to do, and even ASHRAE, but it has not been enough. So we're not really cleaning the air. The problem still exists. And when you look like how a virus is spread from an infection droplet nuclei, you see it remains airborne for a long period of time. Now, at the start of COVID-19, it was we have to disinfect our hands, wipe surfaces, don't touch anything at all. Important. But again, we must address the air we breathe because as droplets are released, they're heavy and they go down to the ground, right? Gravity takes over. They're about 5 to 10 micron in size. But these droplets desiccate and become droplet nuclei. And that's at which point they remain suspended along with a lot of other pollution and they hitch a ride. So now you have all these infectious droplet nuclei hitching a ride onto other particles and you're just breathing them in and consuming them. So again, what we want to do is take that risk factor away, take those infectious droplet nuclei along with other pollutions up and away from the breathing zone. So what do we do? How do we do this? What have we been told what to do? What's the guidance that we've received up to this point? Well, get familiar with the CDC and ASHRAE guidelines. I'm sure many people on this webinar today have done so themselves. First and foremost, it was increase your ventilation, increase your outside air, add portable HEPA filtration. There really wasn't much guidance. And not to mention, they did their best as quickly as they could when ASHRAE launched the epidemic task force, and they came up with some criteria on what you should follow. But it's not as easy as said than done to just increase your outside air or increase your air change rates, turn more air over. First of all, a lot of the HVAC cannot handle an increase in outside air or an increase in additional air exchanges. They can't handle adding MERV 13 filters to their air handling units. It's just not possible. And then if you're running that air constantly, you have to look at the added costs of the overall heating and cooling loads. And then again, how does it impact the relative humidity, which plays a huge role in infection? So is it possible to provide a permanent solution with upgrading your ventilation? The answer is yes, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. But what solutions today can control bioaerosols and PM 2.5? Let's go into what the White House states in the briefing room of let's clear the air on COVID. Ventilation, bring more outside air in, open windows, because now we have outside pollution. We're looking at school districts or even offices in cities, inner cities, where the air quality isn't good. You don't want to bring that in because now you're breathing in nitric oxide and other pollutants as well. So you're actually creating a more dirty atmosphere. Air filtration, great. But if you see it says use HEPA or MERV 13 filters within an HVAC system, okay. Majority of HVAC systems cannot handle either HEPA or MERV 13, or it says use portable air filtration systems to supplement ventilation from the HVAC. Okay, portable air filtration systems. Everybody's heard of that. A lot of people have them in their home, but is it right in a commercial setting? Answer is no, and I'll talk about why. And then of course, air disinfection, implementing upper room UVGI systems to add another layer of protection. I can agree with that. It's a multi-layer approach. But the problem is the recommendations are not enough and most times not achievable, as I talked about before. Not only can the HVAC systems not handle MERV 13 or HEPA filters or an increase in air change rates or even outside air, the answer is it also just adding portable HEPA filter systems. This will not address, and this is critical, proper airflow distribution or what is known as ventilation effectiveness. If you're just throwing a portable system in a corner of a room, of a large space, a high occupancy load, it's just turning that same air in that little location over and over again. And again, we're taking pollution that likes to remain suspended in air and we're bringing it down to the breathing zone. We don't want to do that. We want to avoid that. So proper airflow dynamics is absolutely critical. And most of these systems are not positioned or sized appropriately for the volume of air that's needed to be processed effectively. So there are some upcoming changes, and this is good news. ASHRAE has established very recently a committee for a new standard focusing on mitigating airborne infection transmission. This will be the SPC 241, of which I will be on a committee member of, and I will help establish these standards. We'll establish the standards that provide clarity on how to implement the right IAQ strategies. Again, a multi-layered approach. Technologies can work together, and will include applying technologies in the right setting, rather than what we do today, casting a net over the problem and saying it's a solution. Because unfortunately, this has created a lot of issues, a lot of litigation, a lot of money spent that was done for nothing, unfortunately. And that's what we want to try to avoid moving forward. So, doing the homework. Now, it's been very confusing. There's been so many products out there. Everybody says 99% effective. And you don't know. You know what you know. And if a company's promoting this, you can assume they're not lying. Well, we have to take a deeper dive into exactly what that 99% effectiveness means. So what do? First and foremost, we always want to look at what and where were these companies before COVID? What were they doing? What was their business model before COVID? Were they focused on filtration, or were they a vacuum cleaner company and then just decided to capitalize on a very unfortunate situation? And there's a lot of other things to dive into, and we're going to touch on that in a moment. But let's take a deep dive into all of these different technologies that many of you may have heard of or even investigated or researched yourself. First is, UV upper room UVGI. UV works. We know that 256 nanometer, it works. It absolutely deactivates a virus, a microorganism. However, you can't just add a UV system into this room in the corner or at the roof or at the ceiling and say it's going to deactivate all microorganisms present in that room. What we have to understand is how are we going to drive these pollutions to that UV light and allow it to have the proper dosage over time to deactivate those microorganisms. These work in tuberculosis suites in hospital settings where you have proper airflow designed for upper room UVGI. So again, it can work when applied in the right setting and if you have the proper airflow dynamics, but it's not going to filter out particles. It will deactivate microorganisms, yes, when applied right, but again, it will not clean the air generally speaking. And again, I have another citation from the NIH talking about upper room UVGI. Then we have my favorite, known as ionizers, a needle point bipolar ionization. At this point in time, I think everybody's well aware the risk factors associated with ions and the fact that you can't just put an ionizer into the HVAC system and have it rain down magical hydroxyls or negatively and positively charged ions to attach to a viral particle and deactivate that microorganism. There's a lot wrong with this technology when applied in the wrong setting. These are designed to be at the coils of the HVAC system or even at the filter, the MERV 13 filter, MERV 7, MERV 8, whatever you got in your air handling unit, and it works at the source of contamination. It's not going to clean the air you breathe. And in fact, it actually adds additives and it has effects where it can spike the level of different types of pollution, but also play a significant negative impact role on your overall health. If it's deactivating microorganisms and cells, what do you think it's doing to us when we breathe these in? So negative, positive charged ions, needlepoint bipolar ionization can work in the proper setting where you want it to be at the source of contamination. It should never be used as a room cleaning device or an air purifier. It doesn't purify. You're adding additives. And I have additional test data here showing you the risks associated with hydroxyl ions, negatively and positively charged, the oxygenated volatile organic compounds it creates, the secondary organic aerosols it creates, and just all the studies talking about these types of electronic air cleaners and how we need to stay away from them. There's a lot more testing that needs to be done to look at the overall validity of the product and how it actually functions and works. Citation from ACS, and you will all be provided this presentation afterwards. And this just shows some additional data of the spikes in concentration from things like formic acid, like glycerol, amines, nitric acid. When those ions, negatively and positively charged ions, get switched on, we actually see a spike in this organic compound. And we release our own organic material, right? So when we're releasing our own organic matter, you turn those ions on, we actually see a spike in risks associated with these types of pollutants. So again, caution yourself. Now, they do say 99, I'll take a step back, they do say 99% effective, but understand testing was performed in a 10-inch by 10-inch cube chamber. Doesn't provide you with real-time results, real-world condition in a very dynamic setting. Anything can pass in a 10 by 10 inch chamber or even a 10 foot by 10 foot booth. You can get any technology to look good and say, hey, we eradicated 99% of what's been in this little chamber. Sure, but what does it do in real world settings where you have a lot of different flowing issues? You've got people coming and going, you have airflow coming from your HVAC system that could actually be bringing in polluted air. What happens with these systems when they're in these dynamic type settings? Then we have floor UV units. Again, same situation. They're floor mounted, so we know the risks associated with that. And UV. You can't just throw air through a UV light and say it's going to deactivate a virus or have the proper dose associated necessary to deactivate a type of microorganism. It's just not going to work. And in fact, this particular company was sued by the Sacramento City Unified School District because they sold these products claiming that it's going to work. When somebody actually dove a bit into the detail, peeled back the onions, researched the product, they said, no way, this product's not going to function appropriately. There's no efficacy behind this product. Take them back. So there's just been a lot of things going on over the last 3 years now. And then you have induct UVC. Works, absolutely, but at the source. So again, at the coils or at the filter within the duct. And it will clean the duct where the dose of the irradiation comes from. So it can work, and this can be part of the multi-pronged approach, and it will keep your HVAC system and the ducts where the UV is clean and free from any type of bacteria, any type of microorganisms. These obviously don't address room level mitigation. So everything we talk about today is addressing at the room level where the risks are. This is not going to do that. And that's okay. That's not how that technology was designed. And then you have large room UVC. Yep, works absolutely. But this, again, isn't going to address air quality. It's going to deactivate microorganisms on surfaces when it's unoccupied. So, okay, if you want to use these systems to, again, deactivate microorganism, use it as part of your mitigation strategies or approach, sure, but it's only an unoccupied space. As soon as we have more people coming into that room, guess what? You can't use this, and you're just going to have pollution and who knows what else coming off of the human. And then another one of my favorites is fogging. Again, I steer people away from this because a lot of times these foggers aren't used appropriately. You're using high concentration of chemicals. I know they say they have something that's safe and EPA rated, but it still has a risk factor. You leave a residue on whether it be desks or toys or wherever your facility, whatever your facility is, it leaves a residue. And for kids, for school districts, K through 5, kids are going to put their fingers in their mouth. They're going to put toys in their mouth. We don't want them to be exposed to these types of chemicals. And again, it's not addressing the air quality. It's a deactivation of microorganisms present on surfaces. It's only going to get to surfaces it's exposed to, much like UVC. Underneath the desks, any type of shadowing, it's not going to address. And then, of course, we have the upgrade to the HVAC, to the MERV 13 filter, increase air changes, increase outside air. It is critical. You do want to have the highest grade filter you can have in your HVAC system, mainly because, yes, the inside air, but what's coming from the outside. Here we're on the East Coast, we're in Massachusetts. Last summer when we had the wildfires in the West Coast, our air quality index was, I forget, it was extremely high. And we do samples in our facility all the time. And we noticed a significant spike. So we wanted to get a baseline. Where is the spike coming from? Now, we only have MERV 7s in our HVAC system. We went outside and we read, I don't even know how many millions and millions and millions of particles present just in the outside air. So it's impacted with the air you bring in. So you do want to try to increase that filter to the highest level you possibly can, whatever your air handling unit can take as far as a static pressure drop. And again, doesn't truly address room level mitigation. I had a school district I worked with here in Massachusetts. They did everything that ASHRAE said. They increased outside air. They increased their air change rates per hour. Their electric bill went from $14,000 a month to about $45,000 a month. Simply unsustainable. And what do? They did all those upgrades and they just backed off. And especially now with the energy crisis. So the last thing we want to do is increase our overall energy load. So yes, upgrading works and it's good to improve indoor air quality, but we don't need that to be the only source of relief. And then I have a quick chart here that goes over the MERV rating filters because that question gets brought up a lot. Well, what is MERV 13? What is HEPA? What is MERV 7? It's the efficiency rating of the filter. So how well is that filter at capturing microns between 0.3 to 1 micron, then you measure it from 1 to 3 micron and 3 to 10 micron in size. And you can see the different level of MERV filters will determine the overall efficiency. Then you get to HEPA MERV 17 and above, and you're at 99.997% efficient. That tells a small portion of the story. Yes, HEPA filters are efficient. Any H14 HEPA filter is rated at 99.997% efficiency. Again, doesn't tell the whole story. How do we get the concentration of the pollution to that unit? What is the overall load reduction that we're able to create within that room? That tells you the overall performance and the efficacy of the system. Then floor units. I talked about this. I don't need to go into more details, but I do have a video. we tested, we have a smoke test we do here with all of our units, specifically our halo, to look at computational fluid dynamics, how the air flows, how effective we are at actually getting the pollutants to the system. And I think the next slide is actually the video that will show you, no, we talk about thermal plume. So the next two slides talks about the actual thermal plume. So rewind back to the first three slides. I talked about how these smaller particles like to remain suspended over time for a long period of time, up above 5 to 7 feet, right? That's just where they like to live. They don't want to drop, they want to stay up above. And they work with the thermal plume that's generated from our bodies. We generate about 75 watts of energy. What does heat do? Heat likes to rise. So we want to work with that thermal plume, taking it away from the breathing zone. It's known as the stratification, right? The warmer the air, the higher it goes, the quicker it goes. So let's work with what's already there. Let's work with nature's thermal plume and drive those emissions away. And that's not what floor-mounted systems do. These work when you have an office with just one person in your home. They're residential. They're not meant for commercial grade mitigation. Now this system's on over here. I'm going to start the video, and we released smoke, and we wanted to see how this works. Do we drive these particles? Let's just pretend this is a bunch of viral particles. Somebody just sneezed. How do these systems work? Well, you can see here, ventilation effectiveness is extremely poor. And it's literally bringing that high concentration load right to the breathing zone of the people in back of the person that sneezed or who's infected. And it's just not doing anything. You can see the smoke up above. You can see it kind of all lingering for the person that's behind that infected individual. Then we put it in the middle of the room, just like ASHRAE recommended, and even the CDC. We're going to blow this smoke right. So we're sneezing right into these units, essentially. What happens? Oops. Sorry. Play that video. All right. So as the smoke comes out, you would think that this system is going to work to actually suck in the smoke. What it does is contradictory to what we think it's going to do. It's taking that away and it's blowing it up, and then it's spilling it all across everyone's breathing zone. Imagine there's a bunch of people sitting at these desks. It's not truly cleaning the air. Eventually, over time, sure, if everybody stopped breathing and they left that room, you'll eradicate any type of pollution in this room, but not while you're continuously generating emissions. So what do? We, again, want to use the thermal plume, and actually research, Dr. Akula at the University of California did a tremendous amount of research, and his article's right here in the citation on the risk of horizontal transportation of viruses and how upward ventilation is the best way for proper mitigation and the overall strategies to improve indoor air quality. So let's watch how this works. The halos, which you saw above me at the beginning of the presentation, if we have the same sneeze or the same infected person breathing and we release these smoke particles, let's watch what happens. Again, we're working with the thermal plume, and it is taking it to the system, eradicating it very quickly, removing it from the breathing zone. This is, just the visualization alone shows you the effectiveness of a system that's above the breathing zone that provides proper ventilation effectiveness. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, everything we do and we design is based on laboratory standards. So we have to understand the importance of processing effectively, processing in a manner in which we don't have a turbulent environment. We're dealing with some very sensitive labs. We're dealing with Pfizer, BioNTech. We all know those names. Those are clients of ours. They know our technology works. Particles are extremely easy in comparison to molecules. It's just the way they act. The kinetic energy, all of it. It's just a simpler way to filter out. So rest assured, if we understand how to filter molecules at an efficiency rating of 99%, we can do so at the bioaerosol particulate level, which we do. So let's talk about the mechanics of HEPA filtration. Again, not everybody understands. They think there's a lot of people out there that think, and there's actually an article written from a company that provides floor-mounted systems, or actually, I think it was an ionizer company that said HEPA filters don't filter out the coronavirus. It stops at 0.3 micron. It can't filter lower than that. That is not true. HEPA filters actually become more efficient the smaller, after 0.3 microns, so 0.3 and below, and then above, they become more efficient. 0.3 micron is at which point the HEPA filter itself is certified. It's known as the MPPS, most penetrating particle size. And that's at which point what's known as diffusion and impaction meet. And that's just the particle that's going to find its way through that HEPA filter first. Much like molecules do the same thing. We look at vapor pressure, molecular weight of the molecule, kinetic energy if we're adding a heat load, and we understand which molecule is going to possibly break through the carbon filter first. Same applies with HEPA filters. So it does not stop at 0.3. It's extremely efficient at 0.2, 0.1, and even smaller. And I have a study from NASA to explain that, and again, further citations. But I talked about diffusion and impaction or interception. That's actually where that 0.3 meets. And that's why we certify HEPA filters at that level. So monitoring air quality is one thing that we all need to do and better understand. A lot of monitoring that goes on today is monitoring PM 2.5. And as I mentioned, that can't be all we monitor, because there's dangers and risk factors far below PM 2.5. But today we monitor PM 2.5. A lot of facilities do. We even monitor PM 2.5 and PM 10 outdoors. The calculations involved with understanding PM 2.5 readings is very complex. You actually use the past 12 hours of the PM measurements in micrograms per cubic meter. You select the minimum and the maximum PM measurements, you subtract the minimum measurements from the maximum again, and you get the average range. There's a lot of variables there to play with. And again, it doesn't tell the true story of actually how clean the air quality is. So we need to do better on monitoring the actual air quality. We need to go below PM 2.5, down to 0.3 micron, and if possible, 0.1, but there's not a financially feasible solution yet that can get down to 0.1 micron. But no, if you have high levels of 0.3, you're gonna have high levels of 0.1. I would like to personally, and as I stand on this committee, is really address, we monitor clean rooms as per ISO 14644 standards. We have to have clean rooms be extremely clean for the products that we're developing. If products themselves are that delicate and we have to monitor the very particles in that room, why aren't we doing the same for the air that we breathe? We're delicate also. So I would like to constantly validate, constantly give readings of what the overall particle volume is from 5 micron down to 0.3. And like I said, if I can achieve 0.1, we will. But right now our systems go to about 0.3 micron. And it gives you the overall concentration that's actually present in that space. And you'll truly know how clean your air is. Because remember, smaller the micron size, the greater the risk of going deep into our lungs, going into our oxygen in our bloodstream. So we want to clean that air. All right, so I've got some real world studies here and talking about our halo system and the effects. And remember, I talked earlier about 99% effectiveness. Yes, we use a HEPA filter. Yes, it's 99%, 99.997% efficient. But telling the whole story is what happens when the systems are installed at a facility and what is the overall concentration reductions from those microns at 1 down to 0.3 or even 5 down to 0.3 microns. So this first case study is at a shoe warehouse, Foot Locker, where it's 180,000 cubic foot volume of space we're looking to clean. We installed 10 units and we did a baseline before installation and a baseline after installation. Obviously before is blue, after is orange. Same time of day, AABC testing actually performed this study for us, so it's third-party validated. And we wanted to see what the actual load reduction of concentration was. And what we saw was an average reduction of 80%, which actually blew our mind a little bit because 180,000 cubic feet of air, a volume of air that we need to treat is a lot. We actually recommended a lot more units, but they didn't want to make that type of investment. So we actually said, fine, we'll sell you the 10 units, but we actually want to know what the efficacy of these units are. So we, AABC testing provided this testing for us, and it actually was very eye-opening for us. We were underselling the performance of the product. The next case study is at a youth center, a church where, again, they had in the basement, they had their youth group. They could not get together because they didn't have proper ventilation in a basement. They had other issues like mold and bacteria. And again, we wanted to do baseline counts before and after. We saw a total cumulative reduction of 75%. And then we did, this is a Head Start. So this is, I think, the infant room in the Head Start. And, they have 3 centers, and this typically is in our space, right? We're typically in labs. So again, learning experience for us. We went in, we wanted to assess the air quality, wanted to assess the space. And you can see when we did pre-installation validation and particle counts, how dirty the air was in red. You're looking at some very high numbers, and these are readings, cumulative readings, but the majority of these readings are at 0.3 micron. And we look at specifically the infant room, which you see here in the picture. We were taking counts of 121 million particles. We took 7 different samples, and we were getting an average of 121 million particles. As soon as I took the tests, my colleague Tim was with me. We were running the data. The director, Danielle, looked and said, "This is my sickest room. I have students that are constantly runny noses, constantly coughing, constant absenteeism. My teachers are always sick. Staff members, it's my dirtiest room." Yes, it is. Here's the proof. So we installed 5 units in this one location, and we reduced that down to 98% overall concentration load. So our reading after installation was let's just say 2 million, dropped down from 121 million. And then you see the reduction of all the other rooms as well. Fairly straightforward. Product works. And again, we have to establish solutions that are going to function very similar to this. We utilize the Halo as not just an air filtration system, but an equivalent air change rate, because it adds air changes without having to upgrade the infrastructure. And it is a permanent solution. It's constantly on 24/7. Additional details on how to monitor IAQ. Details tell a story. We really need to, again, further understand not just PM 2.5, but we want to look at carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. Again, I talked about the airborne particles, temperature, and relative humidity. Relative humidity plays an important role, as I mentioned earlier, and we want to make sure we maintain between 40 and 60%. As far as PM 10 and PM 2.5, there's ranges that we should stay in, but I told you PM 2.5, the measurement leaves a lot of room for questioning, right? What's below this? And what is this true measurement? It's very difficult to get those readings. So we can get better than that. And as I mentioned, I'd like to get to those ISO 14644 standards. As far as CO2, what are the allowable limits? About anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 ppm. It ranges between ASHRAE and OSHA and ACGIH. Much like chemical exposures in the laboratory, there's a lot of variables there. So what are what they call permissible exposure limits? What are acceptable? Obviously, we want to maintain a range between 1,000 to 2,000 ppm. So it's important to monitor CO2. And then range of detection for temperature and humidity. It's very critical to constantly monitor both temperature and humidity, because it does impact the infection rates. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Harvard TH chain, but there's been studies of relative humidity, and it's clearly stated here a level of 40 to 60% is right in the sweet spot where we get the benefits of some humidity, but not the drawbacks of too much. And again, citations, which you guys will all have access to. And Dr. Joseph Allen, he's been instrumental with really trying to help get standards established. So looking forward to working with him more. So we've done our homework, proposed solution. I don't want to make this a commercial. We know the Halo works. Again, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not a silver bullet to everything, but it absolutely 100% improves air quality. And that's because we understand how filtration works. We understand CFM. We know we can't just add 1,000 CFM because why? We're processing more air. No, we have to be cautious of proper diffusion, proper impaction when it comes to HEPA filter, and we have to understand proper residency time when it comes to carbon filtration. And again, airflow. We provide that Coiro airflow effect, which allows us to increase ventilation effectiveness, which I have third-party test data on as well. We can deliver to you upon request. Predictable airflow patterns is absolutely critical. We do have a version of Halo coming out, which is going to give you all of the detection suite of sensors I mentioned earlier. So CO2 monitoring, VOC monitoring, which we currently have, our PM 2.5 monitoring, but as well as ISO 14644 monitoring. We will have a UV light to deactivate the HEPA filter, not the room, but the HEPA filter. And then we'll have humidity and temperature monitoring as well. And this will all be embedded in the continuous monitoring software with complete Wi-Fi connectivity. With the end of Q1, beginning of Q2, this product will be released. So I will have more information to provide to you again upon request. And we'll be able to add different layers of filtration. Right now, the product that you'll see when I stop sharing my screen again above me, the Halo, is either carbon or HEPA. This one was designed to handle the static pressure drops of integrating both HEPA and carbon if necessary and need be, depending upon where we're outfitting the systems. This just talks about everything I said. So I already went over all this data. I doubled up on it, but I certainly appreciate everyone's time, and I do want to leave time for questions and answers. I know I can ramble, and there's a lot to talk about here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will allow for any questions. So if you have questions, raise your hand or type it out, or you can certainly unmute yourself if you'd like. I do got a question. So what is the average volume of air that the Halo will treat? So on average, it's one Halo every 10,000 cubic feet, which will add an additional 1 air exchange rate per hour. So again, we go out, we do site assessments, and it's going to depend on a number of different factors. Obviously space, the overall volume of space we're treating, and then we have to look at occupancy, low density factors, right? Is there a lot of people in that space? If there's a lot of people in that space, we're shedding. There's a lot of things that could possibly shed in regards to viruses, and we're just stirring up generated particles and pollution. So a lot of different factors we look at, but generally speaking, one every 10,000 cubic feet of space. All right, next question. Does the light that I'm seeing play a factor into the Halo's performance? Great question. The answer is yes. That light, you can actually see it on all of our products. It's our smart light communication. And really, it detects the overall performance of the product. If any one of our products are failing for whatever reason, that light will pulse, followed by an indicating audible system that will alert you of what it's failing. So for the hoods behind me, containment's critical, right? We have to meet ASHRAE 110 standards, so that's air face velocity entering the hood. If that's compromised in any way, let's say some of the sash, and I'll actually open it up. So if the sash is left open, this is a sash, then that light will pulse on either system to give you an indicator that it's not operating at peak performance, and it helps improve overall laboratory safety. And then for the Halos, it will detect any type of fan speed reduction. It will detect any type of spikes in volatile organic compounds, VOCs, or acids when we talk about laboratories. And then that light will pulse, followed by an audible. You can see the light pulsing on that little command module there. And then we have what's known as eGuard. It's a web-based portal where you can actually go in and take data shots of exactly what's going on with every one of your products. And you can control all the products through that system as well. Great question. Any other questions? How big is the HEPA filter? That's a great question. Let me grab one here. So the HEPA filter is 3 square feet. It's a very robust HEPA filter, as you can see here. It's an H14 HEPA filter rated at 99.997% efficiency. Again, tells a little part of the story there. If I was installing this in a lab, would that change the amount of volume of air to be processed? It depends. If we deal with labs that histology, pathology, where they have heavy use of xylene, which is very odorous, extremely noxious, and they use a tremendous high volume of it, yeah, we would probably increase the amount of halos that are required at the molecular level, and probably increase that for 1 every 5,000 cubic feet. Again, it depends. It's very variable, dependent upon the facility. Any other questions? We got time for about one more. Installation. How are the halos installed? Great question. So very much like a lighting fixture. They're tied into the building's electrical. They're hung with, either a threaded rod or gripple wire, and they're tied into the electrical circuits. Runs on 50 watts of energy, half of an amp, draws very little power. So yeah, an electrician would have to install it, but extremely easy to install. And what if I don't have a drop ceiling like seen in your facility? That's not a problem. I don't know if you remember, I showed you the picture of the Arc that actually had a cathedral hard ceiling. They can be installed that way as well. You may remember from that picture, you saw a black portion of the halo. That's actually in the plenum above me right now. Whereas if we drop that down from a hard ceiling, you'll see that whole area. Can the light be shut off? It can. So through that eGuard platform, you can actually shut that light off or dim it completely. And from there, you could shut the unit off, turn it on, increase fan speed if necessary. We suggest never shutting the unit off. It's much like an air conditioner in Florida. You shut that off, that building's going to get very hot very quick, and that AC is going to work extra hard to cool that building off. Same applies with any type of filtration system. You're going to allow for high concentration loads to exist if that unit's off, and it's just going to work harder to reduce that concentration spike. So we want to keep them on 24/7, and again, with the energy consumption, it's very minimal. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I truly thank everyone for being on this webinar. I hope it was educational, and please do reach out via email. We will send this presentation to you so you can look at all the citations. You can have it for your information. And if you would like us to come out to do a site assessment or just have another individual conversation with us, please do so. Thank you very much, everyone. Truly a pleasure. Have a great day.